So tonight on the Bapcast, we are joined by Dawn McAvoy, one of the leading voices in Northern Ireland's pro-life movement and a founding figure of Both Lives Matter. For years, Dawn has stood in the middle of one of the most divisive and emotionally charged debates of our time, and that one of the most debates for time. She has faced the criticism, the hostility, and the cultural headwinds, yet has remained consistent and clear that the lives of both mother and child have value, dignity, and worth. Both Lives Matter has challenged the narratives, influenced public debate, and provided a voice for countless women and families who feel unseen in the abortion discussion. So tonight isn't about soundbites or slogans. It's about truth, reality, and human stories. We'll be diving into Dawn's own story, the battles she's fought, and the deeper realities of what abortion means for women, children, and society at large. So, Dawn, thank you very much for joining us on the Bapcast this evening.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. So, as I said, just quickly dive into a wee bit about yourself, first of all, and then into the realities of abortion. So, could you start by just sharing a wee bit about your personal journey and what led you to pro-life advocacy, please?
Probably always cared about unborn life. I remember at school I had a wee lapel pin with 2 wee feet. I think they're based around 11 weeks development. So always cared. But then at university, so that was my first pregnancy, it was unplanned. Now I had been with my boyfriend for a few years and we're now married and we did go on and had our first daughter.
Yeah.
But it was still a pregnancy crisis. So that experience and that decision, things that were said at the time, sort of sowed a seed for then what later became the campaign as part of my work in the advocacy space.
Was there like a spark behind Both Lives Matter? How did it go from an idea into a movement?
In 2015, the local Department for Justice, the then Justice Minister, launched a public consultation into changing the law on abortion in Northern Ireland, which some people would say was very restrictive. I would say was very protective of both lives. So they wanted to change the law to introduce abortion for what they were terming fatal fetal abnormality and in cases of sexual crime. I was working for the Evangelical Alliance, so we were engaging in that, and I was meeting primarily female MLAs because they weren't speaking up. Now, the Northern Ireland Assembly voted against the law change at that stage in 2015, but the challenges to the law were really ramping up. There were local activists, including in the Assembly, but Amnesty International and groups across the water abortion providers were increasing pressure. There were court cases. So we felt, I took a proposal to the Evangelical Alliance that there was the space for a new voice that would be collaborative, that could speak with a religious voice to people who have a faith, but it didn't rely on that. So Both Lives Matter was launched in 2017.
Okay. Were you a Christian at the time you fell pregnant?
Yeah.
So that obviously would have influenced your decision also.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it did. I think growing up here in Northern Ireland, where abortion wasn't easily available, the laws for the most part said no to abortion. That undoubtedly played a part. It wasn't normal. It wasn't commonplace. I think for the most part, people looked across the water to GB with horror at the ease with which abortion was accessed. And certainly when I faced my unplanned pregnancy, I was across the water, and the first GP I went to said I didn't have to leave university. I had other options, but it was abortion. And then a second GP said not to throw my life away. So that was her response. And I just remember being horrified, thinking,
This is your first two interactions with health professionals after?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've no doubt, to their mind, they were looking at me, poor little girl from across the water where there's no abortion, and this is a compassionate response in their minds, because I was at university and my whole life was laid out before me, but I don't look at it that I threw my life away.
So with the Both Lives Matter, obviously there's been, I'm sure, a lot of criticism given the the contentiousness of the issue. How do you cope with those criticisms?
Do you know, I think people imagine I get more criticism than maybe I do. I also quite thick skin, so actually it doesn't really bother me. No. And I think, to be fair, whether I'm talking to you, Mark, or whether I'm talking to a politician or anybody, I say the same things. Do you know? So
that's consistent.
Yeah, it's consistent, and I believe what I'm saying. So,
and Northern Ireland does have a very unique sort of cultural and political backdrop. How does that affect the work that you do?
I would say the most actually encouraging thing for me when we launched Both Lives Matter was the degree to which it brought people around the table. You know, Republican, Unionist, Nationalist, Loyalist, Catholic, Protestant, male, female, young, old. We were all sitting around the table together. It was a bridge across divides, which was fascinating.
Well, it is an issue, I suppose, it is devoid of religion, really.
It is. Yeah. You know, you don't have to have a faith to believe that life before birth and both lives and pregnancy matter.
You would kind of think that it would just be a given, but from your experience, what are the biggest misconceptions people have surrounding abortion?
I think part of the reasoning behind the campaign was that even as a woman, when you started talking about abortion and advocating against abortion and for life, people put you into the anti-woman box. So either you were patronised because you were sort of enthralled to the patriarchy and you didn't understand that you were, you know, being controlled by men, or you were put into a religious crazy box.
Yeah.
So although I will never deny Jesus, I don't need to turn to the Bible to defend life before birth.
Certainly not on the moral basis, anyway.
No. So you look at, I always think we have the truth of science when life begins. We have the truth of lived experience, you know, what we experience in pregnancy and birth. You know, we know that our baby doesn't become our baby at the point of birth.
So the current term limit says 24 weeks?
Across the UK?
Across the UK?
It's sort of, maybe if
staggers, or?
Yeah, it does stagger. So in Northern Ireland, with the law change, we have unlimited access to abortion in the first trimester. So in the first 12 weeks, it's no reason needed, no questions asked. You can terminate your pregnancy. Between 12 and viability, 12 weeks, and then viability is in and around 22 weeks now. Mm-hmm. Or a lot of people still talk about 24 weeks. But in that second trimester of pregnancy, it would be, if you think about GB and the fact that abortion is legal, but defined on health grounds. But the health grounds are very loosely understood. So it's if the risk to the pregnancy, the risk to the woman is greater if she continues the pregnancy than if she has an abortion. Okay. But really the only thing that limits it is if you've got a medic prepared to do it. So in law, you don't need to have a defined or determined health need. It's not that there's a risk to health that's measurable. And then from 24 weeks up to birth, you can have an abortion if your life is at risk in a way that's defined, so literally life and death, or there's a grave risk to your life that's determined, or if the baby has a disability.
What would you say are, there's a lot of spin and a lot of hyperbole around this issue. What are the truths that don't make it ever to mainstream about abortion? That never get discussed or never brought up?
I think too often people don't. So on the one hand, if a friend or family member tells you you're pregnant, you congratulate them and ask when the baby's due. But when it comes to a pregnancy crisis, you talk about clump of cells. It's not a baby yet. Do you know, so we deny the gestational development.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
We don't talk about what abortion is and the different methods of abortion, so what it actually looks like. Certainly, it's become very sanitized, and the abortion providers, now that most abortions are first trimester and using tablets,
it's very normal.
They talk about bringing on a missed period or late period, so it's nearly completely, the unborn baby is completely dehumanized. They just talk about pregnancy tissue. On the NHS websites, if you have a miscarriage, they'll talk about your baby, and maybe certainly as the pregnancy develops, you're giving birth to your baby in a later miscarriage. the same stage of abortion, they're often still talking about pregnancy tissue. So there's like
Yes, wordplay.
euphemisms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is literally just to justify immorality. It's just changing words around. It's harsh. Could you speak to some of the real life stories that you've encountered? Women who've chosen abortion and those who have chosen life, and obviously the after effects of both.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest factors. The NHS will talk about abortion not causing any mental health harm, and the language on the NHS websites, they'll talk about the most commonly felt emotion being relief. Now, I've no doubt that if you've been in a panic situation for whatever reason, there probably can be instant relief. But certainly going by studies and also the stories of women that have shared their stories with us, there is harm, mental and sometimes physical. So if I think of, there's one girl that has supported us from the campaign started, and then I'd invited her to an event, and she said, I got an email, she said she couldn't come. We were celebrating the 100,000 lives. I don't know whether you remember or knew when we launched in 2017, when the law here was more restrictive. One of the most common abortion myths is that legalizing abortion doesn't mean abortions happen anymore, and that restricting it in law doesn't save lives. Now, that's a lie.
So what was the reality then?
When we looked at the abortion rates here in Northern Ireland, they were 6 times lower than in the rest of the UK. And when we looked, we had a sort of a statistician look at abortion rates from 2017 back the 50 years to 1967. This is all on our website. Looking at the abortion rates, we then were able to say that it was a conservative estimate that 100,000 people had been born in Northern Ireland who would not have been if abortion had been legalised here in 1967.
Okay.
So we put up billboards in Belfast and said, 100,000 lives are here. Why would we change the law, basically? And abortion activists complained to the Advertising Standards Agency in GB. They then had to investigate. They said, the activists said that we were misleading the public, it was misinforming the public, and they claimed it was offensive. So the Advertising Standards Authority investigated, and they explored our methodology, and then 5 months later they upheld our claim and said it was a conservative and plausible estimate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you've got to stand
So the law saves lives, and now since the law was changed in Northern Ireland, abortion rates look likely to have tripled. And
scary.
The most recent year, in 1 year, they increased by 29%. So legalizing abortion does change the culture, and women have abortions.
Do you see like a shift in the younger generations in regards to abortion, like almost like colder to it, or?
It's interesting because I think when you look across to say America or even England, where abortion has been around for nearly 60 years, younger generations, maybe it's sort of the instinct of younger people to be rebellious and sort of reject the status quo. They become more conservative, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now in Northern Ireland, because we didn't have it, there's still that element of, it's progress to introduce it. But actually, we don't describe ourselves as pro-life, because I think people then become entrenched, and you can't have a proper conversation with people. So I don't care whether someone tells me they align with a pro-choice label or not. When you start digging underneath the surface of labels, I think we have more in common than people realise. So most people don't support abortion up to birth. Only 1% of people in polling support unlimited abortion up to birth. And then you come back from there and find what you agree on.
I don't know how anybody, like, even epilepsy, and there comes to that is an okay point, that right up to birth is acceptable. That is at all acceptable, but I mean, that is just the biggest stretch of I don't know, like how do they even come about justifying that? Like, what's their wording?
Well, I think for general person on the street, they don't really think about what it means. So abortion is just framed as a woman's right, a woman's right to choose. It's women's access to equality and liberation, and it's healthcare. So they don't think about it. But you're right. Most people then really push them like to birth, and they think about a baby. They'd be like, yeah, no. But then they'll say, well, that only happens in very rare cases. Now that's true. But over 3,000 babies a year in GB are aborted coming up to birth, post 24 weeks. So, or from 20 weeks up. So that's a significant number of babies.
And like I personally know people who have had kids at 24 weeks specifically, and they're perfectly healthy now at 10 years old. So to say that that's not a viable life is a lie, and we accept it because it's a convenient lie, and like this is what this all centers around as well, is like this element of convenience. It's inconvenient for you to fall pregnant, so you're going to dehumanize this life and just say it's your body, it's solely your choice, and that nothing else matters. It's very dark. I understand and I saw fear and like different circumstances, but it is not just one life, and people really do need to
and it doesn't deny the crisis point, the unexpected nature, or so there are women who've shared their stories. One girl in particular, I remember, she was the same age as me when I had my pregnancy crisis. But unlike me, I had a boyfriend who supported me, and our fathers supported us. And I say that it's important for mothers as well to support you, but this girl, Beth, on our website, she didn't have anybody. Her then partner decided that no, he didn't actually love her anymore, and he'd found the love of his life, and he said he would pay for an abortion for her.
That's romantic.
Yeah. She had a temporary insecure job situation, so she's been no income coming in, and she didn't want to have an abortion. She scheduled an abortion and then didn't go for it, but had no financial or emotional support, practical support, so then went through with the abortion a second time around. She scheduled it.
Okay.
And by the time I met her, she was approaching 40, and in her words, she'd never got pregnant again. And she was told it was a choice. She was told it wasn't the right time, there'd be a better time. And as she said, there was never another time. So she had to come to terms with that was her one child, and she'd terminated, as a younger woman.
And how do you reconcile that? Like, everything's okay when you're young and free and happy or whatever, and it's an inconvenience, but the reality kicks in later down the line when maybe she's lonely and she hasn't had any other chances. Like,
I think, well, that's the live choice, isn't it? That we can control the future, that we know what the future's going to hold, that we can make this decision. It's not like I can choose to go on holiday now, or I can choose what job. A life's a life, and that unborn life will never come around again. So we have to challenge the myth of choice, and we have to challenge the myth of choice also that it's a valid choice amongst many. Too many women feel they've no other choice.
But how we've got to a point where we just okay things because people have been irresponsible when it boils down to it, and they haven't used protection or whatever, or having sex outside of marriage or whatever you want to say about it. But like generally these crises comes from acting irresponsibly. So like, just whatever happened to like owning your responsibilities?
No, you're right, and I would say the people who are sort of celebrating abortion as a right, we have to think about rights in tandem with responsibilities. So nobody, like, I willingly had sex and got pregnant,
Yeah,
nobody, no. So my daughter didn't ask to be conceived, so I didn't see it as my right to take her life.
No.
And so men and women both have to.
But it's getting people to educate that it is life. Like, you have a certain contingent of society, largely left-leaning, who there's no amount of talking to them. It's just cluster cells, just it's a woman's choice, and I shouldn't even have a right to speak on it because I have a penis. And, you know, like, men's voices matter in these issues too, because they're half the reason the child's there, you know.
Absolutely. It takes a man and a woman to make a baby, and every man has a mother. Most men have female friends and sisters, and you know, so I don't think it's a big ask for men to empathize with the crisis, but B, to acknowledge the reality of the unborn child that they have helped.
Correct. And unfortunately, there is a lot of men who are not prepared to step up to the plate, and that is just a sort of a side effect of a broken society or whatever.
82% of abortions are for women whose marital status is given as single. Now, I'm not saying all of them don't have a partner, but that would lead you to think they don't feel secure in that relationship.
But it does, for a well-adjusted child, it does take both parents, and that's why, a young boy coming from a single parent family is more likely to, get involved in crime, etc. There is those statistics out there, but that doesn't make the child's life any more valid or any less valid,
No, I had 2 foster brothers growing up, and I often think about them and the circumstances that sort of took them into the care situation or system. And I think their lives were no less valid just because of the circumstances, surrounding their births and maybe childhood. And everybody deserves equal opportunities.
To be fair and to be balanced, the care system is a horrible, horrible setup. And to think that, there is situations where kids are just being brought into the world to be put into that situation is very harrowing.
But there has to be a better alternative to death.
Yeah, that's of course saying, but it's still better than death. Yeah. As grim as it is, it still comes back to it's life and death. And if you don't have a chance at all, then you never know.
Exactly.
And
so for the people who would deny the humanity of the unborn child, I think they have to talk about the development of unborn life. So after having my 3 girls, I remember doing a bit of a course, and I got most of the questions wrong about gestational development.
Okay.
I needed to be reminded, when does the heart start beating? When do the fingerprints, when are they formed?
Okay, so give us
so the heart. Well, what do you reckon? If I said to you, when do you think the heart starts beating?
Well, I've always just been off the conception, or life starts conception, but I don't know, maybe 3 days or something.
It was 3 weeks after conception.
Okay.
By the 3rd week, the heart's beating. The baby's body is fully formed by in and around the 8th week post-conception. It just has to continue to get bigger.
Yeah.
But certainly by the 12th week, which is the end of the 1st trimester, everything is there. It just needs to form to the point of where the baby's viable. So in the 1st trimester, which is when most abortions happen, the baby is recognisably human. Obviously it's human from conception, but it's recognisably human.
And not to get into shock tactics, but let's talk about the actual realities of some of the procedures that are not chemical. The child can't be taken out of you like that.
Yeah, I was talking to a local GP recently, and she was saying she'd done as part of her training, she was doing a gynae placement, and an abortion. She was told that an abortion was scheduled, and she was asked did she want to remain in the room, and she said she thought about it, but then she thought yes, because I want to be able to talk to patients about what the reality is. And as she said, it was it was theatre, so it was sanitized, sanitary, very clinical, and she just still remembers the sound. So one method of abortion basically like a vacuum. So the baby's vacuumed out. So that's when the baby's tiny enough to fit into the wee tube and just be suctioned out. But beyond the 12th week, then certainly the baby wouldn't be. So at that point, then dissection is required to remove the baby. And then the next surgical stage or alternative would be, and that would be primarily what's done in the NHS for those later stage. And I know this is really difficult for people to hear, but it is, when you're talking about informed consent and choice.
That's all the information.
It's all the information, and too many people don't have it. So the other form of surgical abortion, feticide, would be recommended first. So that's primarily when there's a chance that the baby will be born living. So the baby is injected in the heart first of all with potassium chloride. So one person said it's sort of what's done on death row. It's some of the same chemicals. So the baby's injected first to stop the baby's heart, and then what always strikes me is that's shocking enough, but what most people don't realise, then the mother then has to be induced and give birth. Yeah, so it's not a quick fix.
That's absolutely horrible. And like, I can imagine if people had access to the reality of that information when making the decision as well. I'm not saying the information is not out there, but it's certainly not given so freely. It's presented, as you said, like, you know, the first two medical professionals that you said, it's like, oh, there's choices.
And when they said that to me, chemical abortions weren't a thing, so that would have been probably the vacuum aspiration. And yeah, it was just matter of fact. Yeah, you know, you go in, you have it done, and then you go home and you move on with your life. But, and I'm not saying every woman regrets it, but certainly, and I'm not claiming to speak for every woman, but the women who shared their stories with us, for some of them it's been decades of harm, self-harm, self-medication through alcohol or drugs, and mental health trauma that they've had to seek counselling for. The reality, as I said, for some of them, that they never then got pregnant again. There's the unspoken nature of it. You know, girls who are taken.
It's sold as a one-stop shop, and there's no speaking of the fact that this is potentially going to be a life tag. You know, this is going to be something that you're carrying around like a millstone for the rest of your days, really.
And because women are told this is progress and it's healthcare and it's something to actively celebrate and seek, then how can you say it wasn't good for me? Actually, it harmed my health. How can you say I don't support it anymore? You know, so too many women just are silent. Yeah, they're silent.
Well, I think more so than men, women really want to seem progressive and, you know, and with the current thing, and a lot of times they probably don't speak up when it's clear there's nonsense, you know.
I remember when the Northern Ireland legislation was changed by Westminster in 2019, it was voted on in the House of Commons, then went to the House of Lords. And I remember watching one of the debates, and I can't remember it was a female peer. I was watching it on TV, or probably on the computer, the live debate, and she said that she was celebrating the fact that the law had changed for Northern Ireland, and she said that she and women like her would not be in Parliament if they hadn't had access to abortion, as if women can't fulfill their dreams and have their careers without the ability to terminate their unborn child. And I just remember thinking, that's unjust. You're telling women something that a man will never be told. You know, a man won't be able.
They're being more sexist there than what the patriarchy is.
So a man can, you know, have his aspirations, have his career, you know, live his life, but will never be told you have to, in order to achieve all of this, you need to be able to, without limit, terminate the life of your child.
And it is the word novel because it's always framed as access to healthcare. Since when is death health? You know, it's.
But there is no. I think there's a valid space to argue for more research to be done. There's no interest really in doing research into the harm of abortion.
Well, everybody who unfortunately is in a real seat of power is for the depopulation of the earth, and they don't want to increase the population, so there's certainly any discussions around like potentially ending abortion is not going to happen.
Well, even if we come back to chemical abortions, but even if we think about in the context of global birth rates, and specifically in the UK, to replicate our population, the birth rate needs to be just over 2.1 per couple. And now it's gone down. We're now sitting at between 1.4 and 1.6, I think. So we're not replicating.
No.
So we need to either increase our birth rate or work longer or increase migration, because we can't sustain the lifestyle that we have given the population that we have. And the majority of women polled want to be mothers at some stage.
Just one at a time is convenient to them.
And that's part of the informed decision making. I don't think we want to accept that, our biology and fertility actually is related to age.
Yeah.
So if we delay, we lose the opportunity.
Well, it's over 30. That one was referred to as geriatric mothers.
It has my twin sister, her last baby was born when she was 37, and she was horrified that she was referred to as a geriatric mother. It has, but I mean, for the most part, I think the average age now for the first baby is early 30s. So we do need to understand that if we delay,
And how does that coincide with like autism rates and stuff?
I don't. Certainly, the older you get, there is a higher risk of some disabilities. My understanding is that autism might be one of those. No, but what most people forget is that men's fertility decreases when in their late 30s significantly as well. So male and female, we need to understand our bodies. We need to understand biology, fertility, and then we make decisions based on that, and remembering gestational development and thinking about how abortion is performed.
If there is anyone watching the Bapcast who's affected by abortion, how do they get in touch with Both Lives Matter?
On our website, we have a services directory that we are building slowly. So we list service providers who offer practical support and emotional support to pregnancy, those facing pregnancy crisis and potentially post-abortion who want support as well.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, there's no, I've never really heard of services there for aftercare from abortion. It's sold as relief, so why would there be any aftercare?
And whenever mental health harm from abortion is denied, why would the NHS really be prioritising it? So interestingly, when again abortion was imposed to Northern Ireland, Westminster said, right, this is what you have to provide. These are the parameters that you have to provide it within, and we're going to enforce that you pay for this within the existing budget. We're not going to give you any extra money for that. And the only part of abortion services as healthcare that are it's ring fenced is the actual abortion procedure.
Okay.
So although there's a token gesture towards pregnancy crisis or pre-abortion counselling and post-abortion counselling, there's no extra money for that.
Okay.
They also talk about wanting to reduce repeat abortions and reduce recourse to abortion. But again, there's no extra money being put in to secure either the counselling or increase understanding and access to or take up of contraceptives. So they're not actually doing anything proactively to stop it. But then part of that is because, why would you need to stop a healthcare? So 42% of abortions in GB are repeat. So they're multiple abortions. So at least more than one, if not more. So we do need to be honest about the stats, what they're telling us, the biggest drivers of abortion are singleness or fatherlessness and poverty.
What
So
would you
you're
say to the men out there to step up?
absolutely, you know, we were talking about families and children, and we know government statistics show us that the most stable family makeup is marriage. And that it's not a statement of judgment on anybody who's not married.
No, situations are what they
It's
are.
it's more stable, it's more secure, and we know through statistics what happens whenever families aren't secure to children.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have 3 girls. It's hard being a parent. I can't imagine doing that. And my husband worked away a lot, so I was on my own a lot. But to do it on your own, is really difficult.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to hold down a job, provide for your family, parent on your own, the impact of that is significant. And that possibly is why you're 2 to 3 times more likely to have an abortion if you live in the most socioeconomically deprived area.
I think that's more though, like, due to lack of access to the information, because there's certain no more or no less morally corrupt. You know what I mean? It's like it's just the area, and it's just access to information. You know.
And sometimes, I mean, I know again, maybe that's more relevant in the UK where they've had abortions, or sorry, the rest of the UK where they've had abortions for nearly 60 years. A number of years ago, I was talking to a girl locally who had trained as a midwife and then was working in the areas of relationships and sexuality education. But she was talking about sort of working class areas where she was going into, where unplanned pregnancy was quite common, and actually in the families that she was sort of speaking to, it was a surprise, but they just got on with it. You know, they didn't resort to abortion. You know, they just, on one level, it was no big deal. Do you know?
Right, just like that.
Yeah. And in the best sense, I would say, you know, we have, I think, again, Northern Ireland culture. I would like to think, I think communities are strong, and I know these are generalized statements, but you know, we have that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. You know, we shouldn't be left to do it on our own. We should have support around us. Ideally, a partner who's committed, but at least friends and family, or your street, you know, your friendship.
Yeah, but unfortunately, you know, some people don't even have that, but yet they still went ahead and done the right thing. You know, it doesn't, you know, just because you have all these things against you does still not mean that, you know, it's ever the right choice. You know, by all means, nobody's here to judge you.
No.
Certainly not, but...
No. One of my brothers, sorry to interrupt, when he was at school, he had a girl in his class, got pregnant, you know, as a teenager. And she was amazing. I mean, I know that can sound really patronizing, but I remember I was a slightly older teenager thinking, wow, you know, she just did it, and she's kept up with her education, you know, and you just think,
things don't
if you value life, you figure it out, you know, or you can figure it out with help.
Well, I think that's the thing. Like, if the motivation is there, and if you do value life, there's always options, and there's always alternatives. Like, even in the worst case scenarios, like sexual crimes or whatever, there is always an alternative. You know, as horrific as that instance may be, like, you do not have to end the life. You know,
no. And I mean, if we talk just maybe briefly about sexual crime, there aren't many statistics around it, but on our website and in our booklet, we do look at a couple of studies, and both of them, one from Ireland, one that's global, both of them would reflect on the fact that the majority of women in those studies who conceived in rape chose life.
Yeah.
And more often it's always presented rape as a reason to have a termination. But some of those women, their experiences, well, it was 2 things. they took back control
of the
of the
situation.
situation, and they saw the baby as their baby, not the perpetrator, not the rapist's baby, and in that respect, they were saying, this is my baby, this is my life. And I don't say that lightly. I just think it's powerful in the context of people saying, assuming that abortion is the answer.
Well, that's the reason I feel so strongly about abortion, and the reason why I wanted to have you on is because I was conceived through, like a sexual act of violence, so I could have been one of those statistics that they use out of the box. Well, what if somebody gets whatever, like, do I not have a right to live? Do you know what I mean? Like,
now, how does it make you? Is that how it makes you feel when you hear?
It really pains me to like hear people talking about it in such a dehumanized manner, because it's like you're removing someone's right to live before they've even had a breath. It's just hard. Like, I may have not had the easiest life through choice, but like, I fucking wanted to live. You know what I mean? Like, I still wanted to have experience and I still wanted to, do the things I do. So to say that is like a viable reason, it doesn't obviously work for me. So like, I do feel quite strongly about it, and maybe, that's because of my biases. Maybe I feel differently if I didn't have that background, but I do, and that's how I feel. And I mean, I've always, before I even knew that, though, I've always been pro-life. If asked, like, the fastest I would have been pro-life, but when I found that out, that really just kind of hammers home for me, because like, no matter the situation, like, my mother was still brave enough to carry me to term and give me a chance at a life, and I've had a good life, and I can't thank her enough for that as well, because there still would have been the option then as well of going to the mainland, especially in those scenarios. But for people who do agree with abortion but feel that like they don't have a voice, what would you say to them? Like, how do they get in touch with you? How do they support, like the work that you do, or people like yourselves do, or how do they go about getting involved in,
They can follow us on social media and go to our website. So if they look up bothlives.org .uk, they'll find us. Always happy to talk to anyone, if anyone's listening. And I'm really conscious, we've been talking about it and can say things quite matter-of-factly, but we're talking about people's lives and life and death, and it's sensitive and it's painful. And we never do, if we do any talks, it's not actually even just abortion. It brings up questions, any baby loss, miscarriage, stillbirth, infertility. This is like, it strikes at the deepest core of who we are and our hopes and aspirations.
It's huge.
Yeah,
it's huge because it's about a continuation. Like, it's
and it impacts all of us actually on one level.
On the macro level, like you were saying, like, we need 2.2, well, 2.4 used to be children to continue just to replace what we have currently, and it's dropped down, I believe, 1.7 or something. So, like, if we're going around freely getting rid of babies just because they're not convenient, we really need to be starting addressing our morals and our lifestyles, I think, to be honest. Like, how have we fallen so far that it's acceptable to, make a mistake and end a life because it just doesn't fit in with your life plan? It's a bit harsh way of putting it, but it's the truth.
Well, I mean, it is the reality that most abortions happen for socioeconomic reasons. It's not the right time. You think you can't afford it. You think you can't afford the next 18 years, Some
of the most appreciative people I've ever spoke to have come from families who have had nothing. And that's the times that they remember most fondly. Like, we had nothing, but we had, like, the family unit, we had, like, materials, not everything, and being a Christian, like, God will provide if you ask him, and there's no need to look out into the world for that. And
it certainly reorients, what's important for any of us, and like I said, I have 3 girls, they couldn't have everything that they wanted, and at times as a parent, you feel guilty because maybe you see, friends are doing, fancy holidays or, having X, Y, Z, but ultimately we know that that's not what we all like nice things, don't get me wrong, but it's not what makes us happy at our deepest core. We want to be loved, we want to be
fulfillment as well, and we're all leaving pregnancy aside, the whole world seems to be running around trying to plug a spiritual hole with a chemical answer, and it's you open your eyes and look up and start looking down, maybe sometimes, I don't know.
Yeah, certainly, and actually we didn't even, that was my fault, we went off on all sorts of other tangents, but if we come back to chemical abortions, the other thing I would say to anybody who's listening is those are the majority of abortions now. But what's really interesting, it's been like the holy grail of the abortion industry to promote pills, because it's early in pregnancy, they can present it as, it's even safer.
That's associated.
And it's bringing on a missed period, and it's no big deal. Now we can talk about the reality of it, and actually research across the water by a public health consultant has shown that with chemical abortions in the most recent year for the stats, there's an underreporting of abortion complications by 38 times. So 11,000 women went to hospital, to an emergency room, because of a complication from their chemical abortion. So we do need to be more honest, and the government needs to be more honest about
times by 38 then.
Yeah, so the abortion notification system is more relevant to previous types of abortion. So it used to be when you had to go into the provider, and it was primarily surgical, and then they started to introduce the chemical, but you had your abortion in the clinic, and then they filled in the form and it reported to the government that an abortion had happened. They had to say the reason for the abortion and any complications. In England and Wales, and those by post. So the abortion providers post out the pills. They don't need to have an in-person consultation at all. So the woman has a video call or a phone call. They don't check how far on her pregnancy she is.
If she's doing it willingly.
They don't check coercion or being forced. They don't check that the woman who they've spoken to is the woman who's going to be taking the pills. So we've seen cases where abusive partners have have forced the abortion. Most recently in Scotland, a paramedic was found guilty. Through his work, he accessed abortion pills, but pills by post can't check stage of baby, pregnancy, or whether there's coercion or force involved. But setting all of that aside, actually just a chemical abortion on its own is taking, in the most recent year, 11,000 women to A&E. So it's wrong to present it as just like taking a paracetamol. But what I think is one of the most interesting things, like I said, it's been the holy grail of abortion providers because it makes it easy. Also more profit for them because they fewer outlays. But if the first set of pills is taken and not the second set, and within 24 to 48 hours of taking the first set of pills, there's a good chance you can reverse the chemicals that you've taken to cause the loss of the baby.
So it's not still...
So the abortion doesn't continue.
So there is still a chance of...
There is a chance of saving the baby. So, and with progesterone, so progesterone has been used by the NHS and sort of healthcare for decades, across the world. And progesterone is used for threatened miscarriage, and in the early 2000s, a couple of doctors separately in the States were approached, gynecologists, obstetricians were approached by women who had taken abortion medication and then regretted having done so. And they asked the doctors, could they help? And they tried the progesterone treatment that they would use for threatened miscarriage, and it worked. So now it's called abortion pill reversal. People can look it up. And it's harder to get in the UK. It is primarily through an American organisation. But if women in the UK take the first set of pills and then think, I've changed my mind, they can get in touch with Heartbeat International on a telephone line. They then can connect to doctors in the UK who are offering this service. Now, it all has to be done within, as I said, ideally 24 hours after taking the first set of pills.
So it's like an emergency.
So yeah, and the quicker you access the progesterone, the more likely it is to succeed. It's not guaranteed, it's not 100%, but it can potentially, in between 55% of cases, and in the States where you can get it quicker, up to 70% of cases you can save the baby's life. When people think that's, that could possibly be the case, it's not dangerous because it's progesterone that's being used within the NHS. You do have to do it through a doctor because you need to have the appropriate progesterone medication and the amount. But certainly we're watching that and thinking it's amazing.
Yeah, well,
it's an amazing opportunity, and ideally the NHS would get on board with this, would look at the potential, and for women who are coming for abortion, they could be told, if you change your mind, then this is potentially something that you could try.
Do you think even if it was an option that the NHS would even tell them? So it doesn't seem like there's a very pro-life attitude around our health service, to be honest.
Well, I was talking to one of the doctors in the UK recently who offers it, and he and another colleague approached the NHS, I think in 2018, to say, we've heard about this. Could the NHS look at it? And they were told no.
Doesn't surprise me.
So there are some doctors in the UK who are doing it, and they are looking after their patients. They're compiling the evidence, and then hopefully the NHS will at some point. Now, the two doctors were sanctioned, so I'm going to be really upfront. They were sanctioned by the General Medical Council and were told to stop offering the medication. They were investigated, and then they were cleared because it's not dangerous. So they're continuing to do it.
The fact that they would even go down that road to try and get them out of doing it just sort of says everything about the system. So you were saying before we started that you guys are launching your own podcast.
Yeah.
And is that going to be specifically around
she laughs nervously.
Abortion issues?
So it'll be abortion, but sort of everything related to life and both lives and pregnancy. So we're going to be talking about contraceptives. Again, I think that's another area most people don't understand. Well, how baby develops, but also like what contraceptives do, and maybe how they work, and then how you make your decisions around that, how you plan and space your children. So the conversation about that. We're talking to a doctor who offers the abortion pill reversal, talking to legal experts.
So these doctors have obviously done this at quite a personal cost to themselves, in regards to reputation and stepping away from the status quo, because most doctors, nurses just tend to toe the line with whatever.
Reputation, and certainly the doctor I was talking to, he's the loveliest man. One of the things they charged him with, they said he was bribing women. And when he was talking to me, what he was, how do you even sort of make this sound like a bribe? But basically, if the woman then comes to him, via the phone line, the helpline that's based in the States. He then is referred, and the woman contacts him, and he then explains what it is, and he has to write a script. Now, because it's not offered on the NHS, you have to pay for the script. So it's about 20, 25, 28 pounds, I think he said, for 2 weeks. Sometimes when a woman will say, because it could be a number of scripts that are needed, because you want to get her through the first trimester. So if a woman says, I can't afford that, then he's been paying for the script out of his own money.
Wow.
Which that makes me feel so emotional.
Well, he clearly feels very strongly
but
about it.
Some people then would say that's bribing women. He sees it as, well, just because she can't afford it, why should she not have that chance? And if the NHS offered it, she wouldn't have to.
They're contacting him already.
Yeah.
Looking the service.
They've found him. He hasn't found them.
He's breaking the gap for them. He's not bribing. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
Dawn, I'd really like to thank you for coming on and obviously talking about this pretty sensitive subject today. Obviously, it is your full-time job, but coming on talking to your man who shouldn't have opinions about it.
Well, I'm going to stop you there, because I absolutely, completely, 100% disagree with that. Because you should have an opinion, and you do have an opinion. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but you shared a bit of your own life story, and I really appreciate that honesty, and I think that's what we need. Men and women need to be having this conversation, need to be honest about it, and being honest about your feelings around it too, because I'm sure in a lot of cases women or men will just say whatever they think their partner wants to hear in that instance, and find themselves in a very dark situation. That's one of the saddest. We were doing a talk a few years ago, and a man came up to me who is in education, and a student had, a young adult, had confided in him that his girlfriend had had an abortion. And when she had told him, as her boyfriend, that she was pregnant, he didn't feel that he had a right to express an opinion. So he said he would support whatever she wanted to do. She then had the abortion, and he was devastated, partly because he was wondering if he had expressed support, would she maybe not have had the abortion, but also because he recognised that was his. Well, I think a lot of men in those situations think that's the right thing to do, but you maybe find that women actually want you to step up and make decisions sometimes, Yeah, and I think when a man says it's your decision, often what a woman hears is, I'm not interested. It's on you. Yeah, it's what I'm hearing there as well, and it does. That's why we're at a stage where it's now men don't have a say, because so many men have just took advantage of this culture of easy come, easy go, and just been emotionless about it. And we have a lot to answer for that. But look, thank you very much, and like, share, and subscribe, and make sure and follow Dawn at bothlivesmatter.org.uk. Is that right? Bothlives.org.uk. We rebranded in 2024. I'll put all the links in the description anyway. Thank you very much, and that is us.